Around 7,600 years ago, an entire world disappeared beneath water, not in myth, not in metaphor, but in a real place, inhabited by real people, whose homes now lie at the bottom of the Black Sea. This is the story of the Black Sea Deluge, and the possibility that humanity's oldest flood myths may have begun with a real catastrophe. To understand the event, you first have to understand the geography. Today, the Black Sea sits in a basin between Eastern Europe and Western Asia, bordered by Turkey, Romania, Bulgaria, Ukraine, Russia, and Georgia. It connects to the Mediterranean through two narrow channels, the Bosporus Strait and the Dardanelles. But 8,000 years ago, none of those connections existed. The Black Sea was not a sea at all. It was a freshwater lake, isolated, landlocked, cut off from the world's oceans by a natural ridge of rock at what is now the Bosphorus. And that lake was much smaller than the sea we know today. Its shoreline sat roughly 150 meters lower than it does now. Around the edges of this ancient lake, people lived. They farmed, they fished, they built villages on its fertile banks. These were Neolithic communities, among the earliest farming societies in Europe and the Middle East. Families who had likely lived along those shores for generations. They had no idea what was coming. Meanwhile, far to the west, the world was changing. The last great ice age had ended thousands of years earlier, but the melting continued. Massive glaciers that had locked away water for tens of thousands of years were still shrinking, feeding more and more water into the oceans. Global sea levels were rising, slowly, relentlessly, and the Mediterranean Sea was getting fuller. Eventually, it reached the rocky ridge at the Bosphorus. At first, water may have seeped through slowly, a trickle of salt water crossing into the freshwater lake. But water is patient, and water is powerful. The erosion began, the ridge weakened, and then it failed. What happened next would have been almost unimaginable to the people who witnessed it. The Mediterranean Sea burst through the Bosphorus with a force researchers have estimated at nearly 200 times the volume of Niagara Falls. 200 Niagara Falls, pouring into a landlocked lake. The roar would have been deafening, heard for hundreds of kilometers. And the water did not creep inland. It surged across the flat basin floor. The flood advanced with terrifying speed. Coastal settlements may have had only days, perhaps even hours, to react. Each morning, the shoreline had moved further inland. Some estimates suggest the water rose by as much as 15 centimeters per day at its peak. On flat land, that is catastrophic. Freshwater wells turned bitter with salt. Fields that once grew crops became poison marshes. Animals fled inland ahead of the rising water. Within weeks, the landscape was unrecognizable. Within months, entire villages had vanished beneath the flood, and still the water continued to rise. The flooding only stopped once the Black Sea reached the level of the Mediterranean, a process that may have taken years. By then, the freshwater lake was gone forever. In its place stood a vast inland sea. And somewhere beneath those dark waters lay the homes, fields, and graves of the people who once lived there. We do not know exactly how many people were displaced by the flooding, but we know they existed. Archaeologists and marine researchers have uncovered evidence of ancient human activity deep beneath the Black Sea. Sonar scans, sediment cores, and underwater surveys have revealed traces of drowned coastlines and long-submerged settlements. In 1999 and 2000, explorer Robert Ballard, the same man who discovered the Titanic, led expeditions into Black Sea and reported evidence of ancient shorelines far below modern sea level. The seabed itself preserves the moment the world changed. Below one layer of sediment lie freshwater species. Above it, saltwater species. A sharp boundary in the mud, marking the arrival of the sea. For the people living there, this was not a slow environmental shift unfolding over centuries. It was the destruction of a homeland. Some escaped, Others almost certainly did not. And those who survived carried with them something survivors have always carried: memory. Here is where the story becomes extraordinary. The Black Sea Basin lies close to some of the oldest centers of civilization on Earth. Mesopotamia and the ancient Near East, the cradle of agriculture, writing, and organized religion, were not far away. In the late 1990s, geologists William Ryan and Walter Pitman proposed a remarkable idea. They suggested that the memory of this flood, passed down across generations, may have influenced the great flood myths of the ancient world. The Mesopotamian story of Utnapishtim in the Epic of Gilgamesh, the Sumerian flood of Ziusidra, and perhaps most famously, the story of Noah. These stories share striking similarities: a catastrophic flood, a warning, survivors, the preservation of life, and the beginning of a new world after the waters recede. Ryan and Pitman did not claim that Noah was a literal historical figure. What they proposed was something more subtle, that a real disaster, so traumatic and so transformative, echoed through human memory for thousands of years. That myth may sometimes preserve fragments of reality. Not everyone agrees with this interpretation. Some researchers argue the flooding was more gradual than Ryan and Pitman originally suggested. Others question any direct link between the Black Sea and ancient flood mythology, but the core geological evidence is not seriously disputed. At some point during the mid-Holocene, salt water from the Mediterranean entered the Black Sea basin and transformed a freshwater lake into a sea. The debate is not whether it happened. The debate is how fast, and what it meant for the people who lived there. And in recent years, some evidence has pointed toward a large-scale human displacement. A 2016 ancient DNA study found patterns of migration consistent with significant population movement from the Black Sea region between 6,000 and 8,000 years ago. People moving west, people moving south. Not simply a slow drift of migration, but movement that may reflect upheaval. Step back for a moment and consider what this event truly represents. Within a single lifetime, perhaps even a single generation, an entire inhabited landscape disappeared beneath water. The land people farmed, the graves of their ancestors, the familiar shape of their horizon, gone, not metaphorically. Geologically, there are ancient human settlements resting on the floor of the Black Sea right now. Physical evidence of lives once lived on dry land. And the survivors, they carried their world with them, their languages, their farming knowledge, their beliefs, their stories. Some researchers believe these displaced populations may even have helped spread agriculture further into Europe, contributing to the rise of farming communities across the Balkans and the Danube Basin. If true, the flood did not simply destroy a world, it helped create new ones. There's something deeply universal about flood stories. They appear across cultures separated by oceans and continents. The Mesopotamians, the Greeks, the Hindus, indigenous peoples of the Americas, and the Aboriginal Australians all preserve stories of devastating floods. For centuries, scholars viewed these tales mainly as symbols, stories about destruction, rebirth, divine punishment, or the fragility of human life. And perhaps they are all of those things. But the Black Sea Deluge reminds us that myths do not always emerge from pure imagination. Sometimes they emerge from experience, from real water, real fear, real loss, from human beings watching the world they knew disappear beneath a rising sea. The story of Noah, or Utnapishtim, or any of humanity's great flood survivors, may preserve one of the oldest human memories ever passed down, a catastrophe so immense that it could never truly be forgotten, only transformed, passed from parent to child, from storyteller to listener, from civilization to civilization, until the geography faded, the names changed, and history became myth. But the core of the story remained. Water came, everything was lost, a few survived, and life began again. Somewhere beneath the Black Sea, the evidence is still there, silent, submerged, waiting,